Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar, Back in Business, SME Support Ecosystems for Cultural and Creative Sectors. This webinar is organized by the OECD together with European Commission Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, and in partnership with Eurocities, World Cities Culture Forum and ICOM, International Council of Museums. I'm very happy to give the floor now to Karen Maguire, Head Local Employment Skills and Social Innovation Division, to open our session and our webinar. Karen, please, the screen is yours.
Great, thank you, Katya, and welcome to all this afternoon for those of you joining us from Europe, but good morning or good evening for those joining from other time zones. I'm really pleased to co-open this seminar with the Commission, Back in Business, SME Support Ecosystems for Cultural and Creative Sectors. And I want you to all imagine yourselves virtually today here in Flanders. Flanders is our host, and while we'd love to have been there in person, we are doing our best to give you an access to the rich offerings of Flanders virtually. So first, I would like to thank our, within our host, Minister President Jan Jambon, who welcomed us earlier today, this morning, in the Spotlight session on book publishing. And it was really great to hear from the highest levels of government how important culture and creative sectors are for a particular economy and society. So we really thank him for his active participation in this seminar. I'd also really like to thank the Department of Culture, Youth and Media, and personally Rita de Grave, because as a senior policy analyst in the department, she's the one who's really brought us all here to Flanders today. And I'd also like to thank Paul Hermans, who is the director of Flanders Literature and who helped host that Spotlight session that hopefully many of you were able to see earlier this morning, that highlighted a number of really important issues and the really wide-ranging types of professions that are associated with the sector, and then what are some of the opportunities and challenges associated with, of course, the current COVID-19 crisis. Maybe just to highlight that Flanders and the OECD's Local Employment and Economic Development Program have had really a long-standing set of collaboration. We have been working on issues of job creation, social economy, youth employment, skills, quite a number of issues. And really right now also as well, we add culture. And, over the next 2 days, we will really see how Flanders is really taking some incredible measures to drive creativity throughout its economy, support innovation crossovers, ease access to finance for creative firms, and really have such a comprehensive regional strategy to the development of culture and creative sectors. And so I think, I hope you'll all join me in learning more about that throughout the next couple of days, as well as all of the other case studies that we'll be hearing from, and the other really exciting interventions from different stakeholders throughout culture and creative sectors. So I'd also, again, just like to express our appreciation and the really collaborative relationship we have with the European Commission for these policy seminars. They're really very important, especially at a time when the sector is incredibly suffering from COVID-19, and all of our efforts to make sure the sector survives and thrives are going to be important. And hopefully the ideas you hear in the next couple of days will contribute back home in your local communities to ensuring that. Just a couple of numbers to put this into context. As we've seen in OECD data, the range of employment in a particular region can go from 1 to 5 or even over 5% in a particular region, such as in Seoul. And if we zoom in even on some of the big cities, we see, in some of those studies that they've done that, in London, it's reported 1 in every 6 jobs is in the creative economy. In New York, 1 out of every $8 is associated with the sector. And even just today, the New York Times reported on a report that came out that found a drop of 66% of employment in arts, entertainment, and recreation. So we all have a lot to do together. And not only for this economic and employment impact, but also for the really wide-ranging positive social impact of the sector in terms of well-being, health, education, inclusion, number of areas. So from the perspective of the OECD's Local Employment and Economic Development Program, what we're really trying to support and reinforce the work of all of our different international partners is how to mainstream culture above and beyond cultural policies to get really the highest impact. And we're talking about employment policies, innovation policies, health policies, and all of those areas that can really leverage the power of culture and creativity. And so that's one area that we're working very hard on, and this is seminar as part of that. Another issue is looking at how to culture proof some of our other policies to make sure that they are attentive to the needs of the culture and creative sectors, and making sure that those firms and workers don't fall through the cracks of different sort of programs. And COVID-19 has really highlighted where that can come across, and whether it's creative freelancers and their eligibility for self-employment measures, whether it's lending institutions and their ability and willingness to lend and value intangible assets of creative firms, or whether it's innovation policies, sufficient recognition of some of the areas of non-technological innovation where culture and creativity can also play an important role. And so, of course, the OECD is here to support governments in their employment, SME development, innovation policies, culture policies, in order to ensure the specific needs of these culture and creative professionals are taken into account. And of course, coming from a program that has a local focus, we're also very engaged in ensuring that there's capacity at all levels of government. And we really see in a lot of our OECD work how some of these very regional local interactions are critical for capitalizing on culture and creative industries. So just a recap maybe of some of the other webinars that we've held that have led up to the one that we're here to today. So this is the third of 4 series in this project in collaboration with the European Commission. And the first one back in December had a focus on cultural participation, where the discussions really focused on how cultural participation is a driver of social inclusion, how it can mitigate factors leading to social and economic marginalization, but also how building cultural capacities and promoting participation, in a sense, is a precondition for any inclusive and cohesive society. And also for ensuring a diversity of the cultural offer, one of the considerations that I think came up in the discussion this morning. And in addition, that seminar also highlighted a lot of the evidence in the literature about the strong links between cultural participation and mental health, other aspects of well-being. And this is an area where, we see international examples of prescriptions by doctors to go to museums, all sorts of really exciting and also new job opportunities at the cusp between health, for example, and culture and creative sectors. The second seminar was held about a month ago. It was hosted by the Glasgow City Region and Skills Scotland. And again, while we weren't able to be there in person, our virtual hosting felt the great Scottish hospitality, and we learned a lot about many of its assets, including the vibrant music and events sector. And that set of webinar discussions focused on specifically on employment, and was entitled Culture and Jobs, Rescue, Support, and Unleash. And there was a lot of discussion about the specific characteristics of culture and creative employment, including challenges associated with social protection, career development, skills upgrading pathways, and how to also make sure that the eligibility for different social programs was on the radar screen of different governments, and how to inject some flexibility in some of those existing schemes. And also just to highlight again the importance of creative skills for such a wide range of occupations, as well as the importance of digital skills for the creative sector. There's also a lot of discussion about measurement of cultural employment and some of the complementary data sources, in addition to official statistics in order to understand a bit more the trends in secondary employment, voluntary work in the sector. And I know for Flanders also, this is really important, this measurement issue, to really understand the size of the potential target population when designing and funding policy measures. So today and tomorrow, really the focus is on how to think about business development policies and the needs of creative firms and entrepreneurs, and how to make this happen. And, this will, I think you've already gotten a flavor this morning, but, as we go forward, I just wanted to say, this is, we're focused a bit, of course, right now on a lot of the COVID-19 impacts, but it is a heightened political attention to the sector as a tool to help with a more inclusive recovery, with building back better. And we see this heightened political attention at EU levels, OECD levels, and even at G20 levels. And just want to congratulate Italy and its leadership in bringing together the first ever culture working group in G20. And that met this week. And Catherine and I were both there. And, there was a lot of support for a lot of the priorities that were designated by this presidency in terms of for example, the crossovers between culture and climate change, where culture can play a great role in a number of ways in terms of behavioral change and how we think about a lot of our green investments going forward. The links between culture and education, and also on the more legal issue of fighting illicit trafficking of cultural goods. And so the OECD, of course, is pleased to support Italy in this leadership role they have in promoting culture through the G20. And also, this is the year of the International Year of the Creative Economy. So a lot of factors that we can capitalize on in order to take this forward. So just to conclude, I'm pleased again about this cooperation between the OECD and the EC to really support evidence for how to design policies that will help build a more resilient cultural ecosystem for the future. And I look forward to all of the comments that everyone has here today. And I'll join you again tomorrow, where we have sort of our wrap-up discussion on how to think about culture and creative sectors in a broader, comprehensive regional development strategy. So thank you to all for participating. And Katja, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much for giving this broad perspective and the global even perspective to the issues. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Catherine Magnan, Head of Culture Policy Unit, our partner in the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture in the European Commission. Catherine, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, fantastic. I'm participating from my phone. Look, I'm very pleased to be with you as well. And Karen, that's our week, isn't it? I mean, we started together, when was it, on Monday? Was it on Monday? So many events at the G20, both contributing with what our respective organizations and the countries we have behind us do to address, in the case of G20, illicit trafficking in cultural goods, education for cultural heritage, etc. And now the more economic side of the contribution of culture and the cultural and creative sectors. And I'm delighted to be with you to open this seminar, because indeed it's a great collaboration we have. And it's a first, I have to say, between the OECD and the Commission on those topics. And it's both great because it's global and going down to the depth of where things happen, which is the regions. And you mentioned Flanders. We are being welcomed today by Flanders. Well, I'm sitting in Brussels, in sunny Brussels today. It's not that far away from Flanders. And last weekend I was in Bruges and could be remembered of all the amazing past of Flanders, which was, one of the leading cities in Europe a long time ago, a few centuries back, and is again one of them now, in particular for the cultural and creative sectors. So we all have a lot to learn from each other. And that's exactly our contribution in the European Commission, or at least one side of our contribution, the peer learning between EU member states. Culture and the creative economy are matters for the national and the regional governments when it comes to hard decisions. However, there is a lot we can do learning from each other, comparing practices and peer learning. We can do that at regional level in the EU. We can do that at a global level, as we are doing today. And before I touch upon what we've been doing to address the crisis, because that does frame the discussion today, I want to thank my colleague Maciek Hoffman, because he's been doing with Ekaterina a great job in putting this seminar together. I won't be there at the end of the seminar, so I want to thank him now, because it was a huge work again together with you guys. But he really pulled, did all he could to bring to the table in the past seminars, but today again, a very wide range of services in the Commission, departments, if you want, or ministries, whatever you want to call them, but who all from their respective angles are contributing to supporting the creative economy. So it's DG Connect dealing with digital issues, it's DG Regio with regional funds, it's our colleague in Horizon Europe in the research department, etc. I mean, you will hear them today. Karen, you gave a few figures, so let me also give a few, you gave them on the global level and you had a few examples. I will just want to give a few examples or a few figures at EU level on the size of the cultural and creative sector. So it's 4.4% of EU GDP, roughly, let's say 4%. But it's more than the automotive industry, and that's something that is important to remember. I mean, those sectors are separate in a way. I mean, you've got I don't know, audiovisual on one side, press and the performing arts on the other. But if you take them together, they bring more to the economy than the automotive industry. Then they represent 7 million people employed. And a lot of freelancers, a lot of SMEs, 90% actually are SMEs or freelancers. And that's one of the huge characteristics of the sector, a strength, because we do know that innovation comes from SMEs, but also a weakness, because these people, when there is a crisis, are the first in the line. Freelancers or cultural sectors, when the venues are closed and when there can be no audience, I mean, they basically lose all their revenues. And we have learned that, I mean, there has been a study recently which has shown that the cultural and creative sectors have lost collectively 30% of their revenues last year. And the most impacted among them are performing arts, of course, 90% of revenues lost, and the music sector, around 70%. So it's pretty dramatic, and absolutely dramatic for a high number of freelancer people on short-term contracts. And that's an issue we want to address. I mean, that's an issue that is very present in our minds in the Commission. We have started an important work on the working conditions of artists. We published a study on the working conditions of artists recently, at the end of last year, which goes through all the remuneration, social security, status of artists issues. And we want to pursue the conversation with our member states, with the countries that are members of the EU. We will have an expert group starting soon. We will also have consultation of the sector. It's not an easy field, because those competences, I mean, those decisions remain at the national level. When it comes to, should we have a basic income? Should we have a social, should we choose which social security mechanism, etc. All these are national competences. But yet again, we can learn from each other. Some countries have statuses for the artists. Others have, unemployment benefits of a specific kind, which reflect the specific nature of artists and cultural professionals workers. So we must keep reflecting and exchanging together. We must do that in the field of mental health as well, because that's an issue which came to the fore very much so because of the crisis. Culture took us through the crisis. Who could have survived lockdown without a good, good books, good music, good series, good films? That would have been probably impossible. So I think it's high time that we quantify the well-being that culture brings to people and the importance for their mental health, and that we also reflect, and that's something we also want to do together with you, OECD, further on how we can advance on the issue of mental health and well-being through culture. I think that's enough as a way of an introduction on my side. Again, we're delighted to work with you and to have such a wide audience today. I think those seminars really are really useful. And again, a huge thanks for all the colleagues who worked very hard to bring all the expertise that you will be listening to today through all the interventions that will be shared. So thank you very much and have a good seminar.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. Merci beaucoup. And also thank you for this convening power that you have to bring in the other parts of the Commission to our seminars. And we're trying to do the same here at the OECD as well. And great thanks also to Maciej, who is making this happen as well. Okay, well, thank you for this opening and introduction. And now we will dive into the first session. This session is focusing on innovation. And when we were discussing how to build it with Pierluigi Sacco and other colleagues in the Commission, maybe we thought that it's quite a broad theme, and we decided to have even 2 sessions on this. So the first session will focus on innovation within the cultural and creative sectors. And I think the idea there is that there are a lot of innovation flows between the cultural sectors and creative sectors. And when maybe people are now thinking whether to continue to subsidize the cultural sectors, those that are not so market-oriented, maybe it's important to keep in mind this innovation dynamic that is happening between ideas and working methods and etc. that are generated by the cultural sectors and then flow into more commercial, more market-oriented creative sectors. So maybe that's an idea we would like to discuss in the first set of our discussions in this first session. And then we'll follow with the second session, and that will focus on how to support innovation crossovers between culture and creative sectors and all sorts of other sectors, of course, manufacturing, but also maybe health and etc. and other sectors. And what are the issues there, how we can support all this. And of course, all this process, they're happening very much at the local level. So, and they're connected to the cluster development policies, etc. So it's quite interesting to have this local lens to the discussion. For these 2 sessions, we have really an incredible panel of speakers who will join the panel, but who will also present their concrete case studies from which we can learn. So it's very good to discuss the general ideas and the theory, but it's also important to understand how this happens on the ground and how the results of these projects can then feed back into the policy. So I'm very happy to introduce our speakers for this session. And we have with us today, and you will see them live in a moment, Michele Magas, Chair, Industry Commons Foundation, Annette Novak, Director General, Swedish Media Council in Sweden, Josh Sippel, Senior Lecturer of University of Sussex and member of Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center led by Nesta. And Nesta was really our great partner in the previous culture webinars. And I'm also very happy to introduce Pierluigi Sacco, my colleague, Senior Advisor on Culture and Local Development for the OECD, and Pascal Kaiser, who joins us from Avignon in France, where he's President of La Manufacture, and we'll hear the story of La Manufacture later in the session. So welcome to all the participants and welcome to all our speakers. Shall we maybe dive into the first set of questions? So as I was saying, it will be quite interesting to understand how this how the cultural parts of the sectors, when we're thinking maybe about museums, parts of visual and performing arts, how do they function as research and development laboratories for the rest of the cultural and creative ecosystem? And also maybe how the crisis is disrupting this innovation dynamics within the cultural and creative sectors ecosystem. Maybe I can turn to Pierluigi. What's your take on this? What are your views on this?
Thank you, Katia. Well, I think that this is one of the most critical aspects of our understanding of cultural innovation ecosystems today, because there is a tendency to focus on specific sectors and how they can leverage in terms, for example, of economic impact of job potential. And sometimes there is a tendency to overlook or to downplay the role of sectors that are smaller and typically less market-oriented. But the truth is that the less market-oriented sectors have an incredibly important role in their capacity to experiment with new ideas. The point is that the market orientation, of course, is great, but also at the same time creates serious constraints, and especially so if the cost of production is huge, and so the entailed risk in production is fundamental, and inevitably you have to play with hedging strategies that put in a corner the possibility of radical experimentation. What happens, for example, in the visual arts, in theater, in part of the museum and heritage sector, and in most experimental components of cinema or literature, just to make examples of sectors that also fall within the family of culture and creative industry, is that you really have an opportunity to experiment. So in a sense, these sectors are really the R&D lab. This should be better recognized into our policy design. If we don't understand what is the strategic connection between this kind of activity that can be seen as elitarian or relatively minoritarian, but it's really fundamental to feed new ideas and new concepts into the industry, in some sense, our competitive capacity is also at risk. So from this point of view, I would also encourage a closer dialogue between the most experimental parts of the cultural and creative ecosystem and the most industry-oriented parts, because especially in a moment like this, in which we are reconstructing creative economies after the pandemic shock, I think that there is really a win-win situation in creating new coalitions to work together and not simply to advocate, but to generate new models together that can be more sustainable in the post-pandemic scenario.
Thank you so much, Pierluigi. Also, this morning we had quite an emphasis on the fact that, in fact, public funding is not just good because it's funding, but because it can also allow for experimentation, right? So that's quite an important point there. Annette, may I now maybe turn to you, because you usually say that culture is the fourth magic ingredient of the triple helix model, so which is quite related to this discussion that we are having now. So what's your take on this? Do cultural sectors really serve as a R&D laboratory for other parts of the creative ecosystem? And what's happening now also with the crisis? What kind of disruption are we witnessing?
Absolutely. I'm just going to start in another end of your question, because I would like to go back to what Pierluigi was saying, with a very concrete example, actually, of this experimenting that we've seen just recently. And during the pandemic, we've seen the platform TikTok boom with creativity from people, I would say, young people who wouldn't be normally included in the SME sector because they are not yet SMEs. So you have the experimenting going on in another sector that we might miss. And the example is a girl called Ashley Xu, and her TikTok handle is Ashley Has a Camera. And about 10 days ago, she showed us disruption of the advertising industry, because she created a full-scale commercial video that looks smashing from her room, from her student dorm. It's a Sprite commercial, and anybody who's slightly interested in advertising, I really advise you to look at it, because it really looks like these massive productions that would have cost several double-digit millions to produce. And this girl did this. She created 15.8 million views and 4.3 million likes in about no time. So why am I telling you this story? Because the reaction of the industry that through her video almost was disrupted by just, this very low cost production. They say, give this girl a job. And I don't think she shouldn't be hired, but the industry should instead, of course, learn from her way of experimenting with very slight resources. So I think it's no longer about ideas, it's about execution. And it's not so much about who and how much, but on how. And I would say that Ashley masters the crucial elements in digital competence and media and information literacy. She knows how to create, or at least she knows how to experiment around creating. And here we need to look into what will this become? Can she monetize? Can she create long-term commercial success with what she's done already? Not so sure, but she knows how to create. So I just wanted to add that into this. And drawing back to your question, Ekaterina, on the cultural as the magic ingredients. Well, my background, when I used to run Interactive Institute, I was CEO of a research institute with ICT and design in focus. We had culture as the fourth magic potion into the triple helix became quadrihelix. And I would say that there was a constant proven innovation track record with that. And yes, bringing in artists in residence, bringing in that wild and crazy in the otherwise very, how can I say, structured and efficient managerial principles. That is the magic potion. So yes, more culture as core. That's my.
Yes, I remember you were also saying that maybe today it's not so much always the companies that have the best technology that will gain, but also the companies that know how to deal with this experience model. So there is this whole shift to experience society, experience consumption. So I don't know if you want.
Absolutely, I think we're in a attention economy, and we tend to, I think, sometimes, at least from the policy side, focus too much on technology readiness levels and very engineering perspectives. When if you come from the design side, when you have the user as a center focus point and the user's experiences and the user's sentiments and creating that and building the tech instead around it to support that feeling. I think that's really the 180 degree that we have to do to understand what the new thing will be.
Thank you so much, Annette. Josh, may I now turn to you what's your take on this?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think one of the things which is really interesting about the role of the more cultural and perhaps kind of non-market facing sectors is that we also need to be thinking about the role that they play within the broader innovation ecosystem that companies are playing in. And so this is something that we've been looking at in a new piece of survey work that we've been looking at, and we found that, and this is including post-COVID, companies that are innovative view local arts venues, local arts resources. They're more likely to view that as a valuable asset to their business than companies that are not innovative. And so this is even within the creative industries. And so this is one thing that sort of feeds into this. And I mean, I think thinking also amongst these other issues around the thinking about the impact of the disruption of COVID is also thinking about the impact at the local level. And one of the things that we know is that companies, even if they're selling around the world, some of our research through our Creative Radar program that we've been doing as part of the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center, one of the things that we find there is that companies that are innovative are much more likely to get lots of their new ideas from very local places. And even if they're selling around the world, they get those ideas from local. And one of the things which we still don't know yet is what the impact of the crisis means when everything has gone digital. And this is something that remains a very crucial question for the sector overall, because once we start understanding the impact of that, that's going to have really major implications for clusters, but also for innovation and innovation activities moving forward.
Yes, thank you so much. We'll be very interested to learn more from the survey you mentioned. And of course, yeah, obviously there are a lot of unknowns with this massive disruption. Michaela, may I now turn to you and maybe have your ideas on this issue?
Absolutely. I mean, I can definitely echo what my colleagues have said. And there's one thread that is very, very clear for me. And that is that, I mean, there is no work in the culture creative sector that doesn't consider the human element. So the human in the loop is absolutely integral to everything that happens in the culture creative sector, and particularly in these R&D labs that are in the publicly funded institutions. This is where we can detect some hints about future skills, about future occupations, about engagement. This is not only relevant for cultural creative sector, it's also relevant for frontier technologies. which tend to get investigated in other domains sometimes or very often without involving the human. And therefore, it's incredibly useful to have this R&D place, this cultural place where we can examine what is the human element and how is the human integrated in the loop and how does the human contribute to it. If you think about it, everything is now data driven, so we have to just assume that that's the case. Even our public institutions, and when we were discussing this at the G7I7, the Innovation 7 for the G7 leaders, we were looking at, I was suggesting to look at public organizations, cultural institutions such as museums, cultural centers, or even bicycle sharing schemes as an interface between governments and their citizens. Because, of course, with data connectivity, these institutions becomes interfaces. Now, everything is about interfacing. And of course, culture creative sector is interfacing all the time. So it's not just about being, like Annette said quite rightly, it's not just about being sort of wild and crazy, but also about tapping into the knowledge that can be generated by a sector that is brain trained to look at subject matter from different perspectives, that is trained to do the sort of Disney Imagineering, which is so incredibly useful when it comes to looking at the effects of frontier technologies.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, when you mentioned this interfacing function for museums, for example, I was wondering if there are really enough skills in the museums to do this in this very well increasingly digital world.
Is that a question to me?
It
was a question to everybody. I think some of my colleagues may have other ideas, but I would go back to what Pierluigi has said, which is that we need a strategy for connecting museums closer to some of these other areas of activity, so that everybody can be part of a space of common understanding and experiment together, so that they inform each other. Because for way too long, museums have been operating in one type of regime, as Pierluigi calls it, which is basically, you're funded by your national government. There's a national cultural policy. The collaboration projects are a cherry on top. The collaboration project should be central, absolutely central, where the knowledge exchange happens at all times. It's not just this isolated cultural policy anymore. It's about cross-cutting and uniting, joining forces and creating this common space for understanding.
Yes, thank you. And I think it is exactly that that we highlighted also in our guide that we developed together with ICOM, a guide for local governments, communities and museums. This collaboration aspect was very much at the core of that piece of work. Maybe now we can try to see what are the areas of innovation that are most promising within the CCIs, within this broad spectrum of cultural and creative sectors. And Pierluigi, maybe I can again turn to you to start on this round.
Thank you, Katia. Well, I think that one point is really also tapping into the comments, the latest comments from Michela. I think that one important area of innovation is clearly related to the development of museums. We have been working with the idea of museums as a sort of, let's say, civilian churches, so to speak. So there's the idea that you go there like in a temple, to be obviously instructed, elevated by this, but museums today are really turning into social hubs and potentially into innovation hubs, but this really requires a rethinking of the notion of museum itself. So I really see museums, the traditional spaces, museums, libraries, even theaters to an extent, as also possible transformational spaces to accommodate or to open to the new opportunities that are created by this scenario. Clearly, there are sectors that are very interesting today, and much of this has to do with, I think, the most interesting crossovers. Then we will have a session on this, so I will not insist so much. But it's important to stress, for example, that what's happening in areas like serious gaming, for example, is important, not only because they generate a lot of economic turnover, but also because they show how the gaming element as a very deep motivational element for humans can be so important, for example, from learning and teaching. And so how, for example, leveraging on this, we can also imagine new forms of alliances and strategic interdependency between education and culture. But the real challenge, the one that I really look forward to, where we are really at the start, is how to integrate processes of co-creation into the industry. Because it's true that today we have lots of possibility through digital platforms for user-generated content. But if you think of it, it's like a traditional industry, cultural industry on steroids, so to speak. Before we had the television and television channels that you could watch. Now what we have is sort of a personal ego casting in which everybody has a channel. And of course, most social media channels are very much about, okay, I'll tell my story. But the logic is very much about that, broadcasting yourself. The real point where we are still really, in some sense, behind the curve, the potential curve, is how to create real collaborations between people, how to create new models that make sense also from the business point of view, in which you can unleash the real potential for collective intelligence in creation. When we have this, we have the fully deployed promise of the new digital platforms. Otherwise, we are still, in some sense, dealing with the major forms of the traditional cultural industries that we have inherited from the 20th century.
Yes, thank you, Pierluigi. Josh, if I may now turn to you. So what do you think are the most promising areas of innovation within the cultural and creative sectors?
I think from my perspective, one of the things which is very interesting in terms of the scope of innovation within the creative sectors are the things which broaden out the scope of innovation and bring in different areas. So, I mean, one of the things which comes to mind is some of the work that's been done, which has in cases been called fusion, which talks about the combination of creative and creative arts capabilities alongside, say, technology capabilities. And this is something which has been out for a while. And for instance, the work of the original Brighton Fuse study, which is near to where I'm based, is one example of this. But I mean, even thinking about examples of things like the Createch sector, which we're currently doing some work on, looking at how really extremely innovative ways of taking very new technologies that may not even exist yet, using those to fulfill fundamentally creative aims, is something which is a really interesting frontier, and it's pushing the boundaries of what is even thought to be possible in terms of the experiences, in terms of what even makes a creative industry. And I think as we're seeing those types of breakdowns, I think we're seeing more and more really interesting opportunities for innovation all the way across the board, as Pierluigi says, in museums, and also cutting across creative sectors and indeed across the entire economy, but perhaps in ways that may not have been possible even a few years ago.
Yes, thank you very much. I also think that Brighton Fuse example is quite interesting to look at, and maybe I don't know if you have on the hand a link where we can read more about this.
Absolutely,
great to share with people. Annette, may I now turn to you? So what are your ideas on this?
Sorry, so on the question of promising innovations, I would just first like to comment on the sense-making games and gaming that we were talking about. Reminded me that we actually wrote a research agenda for this about 5 years ago for the Swedish Innovation Agency, and actually underline stressing the fact that this should be a research area of its own. And even you could even claim that it could become an art form like a film or something like that. I mean, we were digging into that because it is so complex. One problem that we saw at the time was that there was a huge lack of competence within the domain of gaming. All the gaming companies attract young people who, when we try to interest them in creating apps for healthcare, or at the time, they were so much into monsters and completely other things that were passionate for them, and they were uninterested in putting their competences and proficiencies in the hands of for instance, like old age healthcare journey. So I think there's part there that we really need to deal with on a policy level to move this forward. We've seen the opportunities, but we're still not really there. But coming back to the question on promising innovations, of course, I think we cannot. We're on the brink of the AI era, so we cannot pass this topic without touching upon artificial intelligence. And I believe that the companies, I mean, we will see an era where the companies who have implemented AI will thrive, and others will lag behind or even go out of business. I think we're also in an era where it's starting to dawn on us that creativity is not a human monopoly. We can see computers create fantastic aquarels or compose amazing music pieces. So I think it's also about coming back to my why I'm really here, the topic of digital competence, and understanding that I think that the future will be teams with human beings and artificial intelligence working together, and we need to include for a successful evolution, we need to include digital competence and take it apart, not just talk about it, fluffy digital competence, but actually pinpoint the proficiencies, the competencies needed to work successfully in a team with a computer and with a system that is actually learning, a machine learning system. So yeah, I will. To me, it's AI, which will be the most promising.
Yes, thank you so much, Annette. I'm happy to welcome also Bernd Fezel, who has joined us now. Well, of course, Bernd is a speaker of the next session, but welcome, Bernd. Bernd is director of the European Creative Business Network. Maybe I can turn now to Michaela on the same question. For you, what are the most promising areas of innovation within the cultural and creative sectors?
So again, I would completely build on what my colleagues have said, completely agree with those areas. We've been running experimental labs for 9 years now. I just had to literally count it on my fingers. It's quite daunting, and we have an innovation community that comes from all kinds of sectors that rose from within the CCS sector. That counts almost 8,000 members now of all kinds of ages and backgrounds. And so we have really a great deal of experience of combining this culture creative methods and frontier technologies. And as Annette has said, for instance, artificial intelligence has proven to be really one of the frontiers where we put the human in the loop. And when we look at the effect that this has on the whole series of things, including regulation, including intellectual property, including, for instance, when you work with neural networks, where does the intellectual property, where's the value of what is being created, especially when it's being created at high speed, and that is a huge volume that's being created, where you cannot even interrogate it. You don't have even the capacity to interrogate it in real time because you're to capacity already in terms of production, etc. I mean, we could go into these kinds of details, but the things that are really prominent at the forefront of our minds, and our community is very much motivated by moonshots. There are a few things which really stand out, and that is upskilling. So everybody participating in our labs in these scenarios where they get to test these cross-disciplinary scenarios and imagine new kinds of, and build, prototype, and be very hands-on with these. No matter what their starting point, no matter what their level of knowledge, no matter what their background is, they're able to up their level of understanding or up their skills in this space. And this is because the space of translating thought into practice allows for common understanding. And the culture creative sector is a massive facilitator for this. It's a huge facilitator for enabling a space of common understanding, enabling a common language. We mentioned the music industry earlier. Music industry is always the one that breaks new ground because it's always the first one to be challenged. But I would argue it's always the first one to be challenged with the new conditions as is now addressing the issues that have arisen from the pandemic, because it is the biggest connector, because it is the easiest language to be understood by everybody, but it also then acts as a main facilitator for a space for common understanding. And then what we understand by having the human in the loop are the new human abilities. And this is not only about hooking people to a system and then reading their brain activity, for instance, and seeing how they react. This is very much about people being part of the system and then training themselves to reach new levels of virtuosity. And this is where we see totally new landscapes evolving, because we have situations where, for instance, people who were in the mechanical era considered disabled. This is the label that we gave them, disabled, because they were not able to move levers. They were not able to press C buttons, for instance, if they were blind, for instance. Now, if you hook them up to a system where they, for instance, are dealing with a brain-computer interface, they are far more talented than some of the rest of us. And so you have a completely new definition of ability, and we really need to rethink what that means in terms of policy, because we should not make assumptions based on what happened before. And the third area that was mentioned was education. And in this sense, we have more recently, in fact, during COVID, we have been able to gather people respecting all of the measures of distancing in Aveiro in Portugal, where we actually had several international universities, so people from Porto, from Norway and from Mexico join in, and particularly University of Porto used the live prototyping lab as part of their curriculum. So masters and PhD students, so a completely new paradigm for education. And we've been testing this, and this works really, really well. So on several levels, we see huge opportunities.
Yeah, indeed, on several levels. That's quite broad, indeed. Well, we try to identify these different areas of innovation, and we already, in fact, started to also discuss the conditions that are necessary for this area's innovation to emerge and flourish. And maybe this gives me a good bridge to our next question on the obstacles, in fact, on the obstacles that are there to really support this innovation crossovers within the creative sectors. And we started to mention maybe competencies, capabilities, etc. But I'm sure that there are much more. So what are the critical conditions or obstacles for all this to happen? And here maybe I can again turn to Pierluigi.
Sorry, Katia. Yeah, I think that we have already mentioned, Karen, for example, in the opening mentioned how huge is the weight of culture and creative sectors today in the local economies and the regional and national economies. So it's also disconcerting to notice that this is probably the sector or the group of sectors in which there is the wider gulf between economic weight and importance and consideration, for example, for potential investors and developers, and more generally from the financial world. So I think that the main obstacle here is clearly of a financial nature. Investors and venture capitalists have difficulty understanding the specificities of this sector. And there have been, of course, measures to tackle this particular issue, but so far not so effective, I would say, as they could have been. And in particular, this crisis is showing that the disruption in the culture and creative sector is probably bigger than you could witness in other ones, also because of the pulviscular nature of this sector, as we know, that is made of a micro or even individual companies in many cases, and very anomalous kind of professional profiles. So I think that a much serious consideration and reintegration of, let's say, the financial palatability, and in particular of finding new innovative tools to make investment in culture and creative sector and financial leverage more feasible would be, I think, the main priority. Of course, there are many more, but I'm also curious to listen from my colleagues what's their take on this.
No, absolutely. I liked very much when we were discussing these questions when you said, I have three top priorities: finance, finance, and finance. And I hope also tomorrow, as we have a dedicated session on exactly this topic, we'll also expand this and maybe provide some answers as well. Annette, maybe I can turn now to you. So what is your list of obstacles?
Well, since we all agree, I think, with Pierluigi on the funding, I will throw in there the understanding that culture is core. A lot of I met many policymakers, many corporate executives, many venture capitalists who believe that culture is the beautiful coat that you put on something that you build at the end. So first you build, you get the engineering and the tech right, and then you put something beautiful on the. It's actually about design and how people believe the design is color and shape when it's more a process, and the process starts with culture as core and with human as core and culture experiences, and then you build the tech around to support that. And secondly, I would say that also in this constantly now a society, I would say that it's becoming more and more complex, where no easy solutions will do. We need to review how we govern these domains, because the silo construction of governance is very negative, and I've seen it so many times. I will just give you a very concrete example, since I work within digital competence and media and information literacy. That's an area that now is governed from many different political areas, so to speak, or policy areas. You have the commerce entrepreneurship area that wants to render people employable, so they need to be digital content for a certain purpose. Then we have the cultural sector or media sector who wants people to be media literate, because everyone's a media company, almost, like Pierluigi just very rightly said a little while ago. And then you have even the disinformation propaganda, so now it's defense. And everybody's actually dealing with the same things, but they have their own definitions, their own taxonomies, and this makes the steering and I would say I'm rather worried of the efficiency of how we are governing this at the moment. So yeah, policy, a more how can I say, a cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary approach, a matrix approach for governance.
Yes, thank you so much. And these governance aspects really speak to my heart, because here in the local employment and economic development program, we've been focusing on this for a couple of decades now. And you remember probably, well, some 15, maybe 20 years ago, in Europe and well, across the world, indeed, people were using the word local partnerships very much. So it's when, I don't know, people from the employment services meet with the education services or with the business and try to come up with some common solutions. But in fact, the problem there was that when they go back to their office, they discover that they don't have any kind of flexibility in their employment or job search programs that came from the capital. So they could have been agreeing on a partnership approach, but they don't have any flexibility to put this in place, indeed. So, and we came up with quite a number of solutions for injecting this kind of flexibility in the management of employment and other policies. So it's very indeed important to get out of this bloody silos. Josh, maybe I can now turn to you as well. So for you, what are the obstacles and potential maybe solutions as well to support this innovation?
Thank you. I think, I think just to echo what Pierluigi said, I think the issue of finance is also something that's really crucial. And I think the challenge of trying to identify and, where necessary, create new funding and financial instruments that will enable companies in in the cultural and creative sectors to be able to grow in appropriate ways, whether that's VC or something else, something which is really important. But I think the other thing that I was going to flag up as a potential barrier and a potential issue, potential source of concern, are the structural changes that will come from COVID. We're already seeing, at least in the UK, where there's a different combination of institutional issues at the moment, a real outflow of workers from creative occupations to other occupations because they are viewing the jobs as not being there. And I think this, but more broadly, given the disproportionate impact of COVID on cultural and creative sectors around the world, this creates risks of structural changes in the workforces that, from an innovation perspective, that's really important, because all of the things that thinking about issues in terms of equality of opportunities and things like this, and introducing new voices, this creates a whole range of issues that can undermine the innovativeness of the sector overall. And I think it's a big challenge, and partially it comes back to issues around government support for creative sectors to help them weather the storm. But I think then thinking about from the perspective of building back better, the option of ensuring that the talent bases are ultimately end up enriched rather than diminished, I think is vitally important.
Yes, thank you so much. So we've highlighted finance, governance, but also this risk of losing the skills and talents due to the current crisis. Michela, maybe you have well, I'm sure that you have things to add or to expand on the things that were already mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that if you look at it from the current landscape that is techno-social, techno-cultural, we are all faced, and this is not just the culture creative sector, we're all faced by unknown unknowns. And dealing with unknown unknowns is both a challenge and an opportunity for the CCS or CCI. And that is because traditionally, I think there has been a degree of misunderstanding in how CCI operate in terms of how the thinking evolves or how the knowledge evolves within the sector. It was considered that, for instance, sciences which dealt with linear evolution of knowledge through deduction and induction was a highly rational way of understanding knowledge, and this is absolutely true if you examine it at that level. When you look at the interrogating subject matter from completely different perspectives, from as many perspectives as possible, which happens in the CCI, it looks actually chaotic and it looks irrational. Therefore, it was logical that one way of analyzing knowledge was considered rational and the other one was considered chaotic. However, now when faced with unknown unknowns, those linear ways of thinking, not only do they not have the knowledge that they can build upon because it simply isn't there, the scenarios, the use cases are so surprising all the time, but also they haven't got the brain training. Sciences often haven't got the brain training to actually be able to interrogate it from all these different perspectives, to imagine all these different viewpoints. And here is where the culture creative sector comes in with lifetimes worth of training. Most practitioners actually underestimate themselves as to just how well trained they are to look at these unknown unknowns and start to interrogate it and start to generate knowledge from these new scenarios. And this is what is incredibly useful. Now, if you think about culture creative policies or generally policy, a few years back, I would have said, we have some educating to do to the other sectors. We have to actually show them what it means to take the creative leap, and bearing in mind that, of course, some of the greatest scientific discoveries have been made by taking that very creative leap. So it's not a black and white scenario. It exists. It's just that it was not acknowledged as a method, as a general method. It was as an outlier more than anything. And I would have said to you, we would have a lot of educating to do, but actually considering how much policy has progressed. I mean, with the mechanisms that have been introduced across not just the culture creative policies, but also across the Horizon program, with the new EIT CCI KIC, for instance, that's aiming at culture creative sector and its new role, with the new European Bauhaus, with all of these new mechanisms, there is really great awareness. And I must say, because I operate also across sectors and across industry is demanding this now. They want to integrate, they want to have experimental labs where they can integrate this type of interrogation of subject matter so that they can be safer in the knowledge of what is being created is not going to have the level of risk that it would do if it hadn't been interrogated. So I think that the importance of the CCI has been recognized, and I think this approach is, I think, gradually also being integrated in education. So there are some new movements towards education accepting this way of interrogating subject matter and creating knowledge.
Yes, very, very much so. A lot of progress made, and well, indeed, we'll hear also about the kick for the creative sectors. I think tomorrow as well in one of our sessions. So that's really all national and international recognition. Very much. Well, we started already to reflect on, well, of course, on obstacles, but also on the policies that are missing or should be there to support this innovation processes within the creative sectors. But maybe we can dig a little bit further on this issue, or on what are the policies that are needed now to support this strategic development within the cultural and creative sectors related to innovation. Annette, maybe you would like to start with this one?
Absolutely, and I was thinking now when I heard your question about what somebody said to me in a conference just the other week. They said that some say that Silicon Valley is exporting tech, but Europe is exporting legislation, and that might be true, but it can also be, and that might be good to a certain extent. But I'm kind of worried that in this era where we're starting to regulate the internet, that we are moving fast, we are listening very much at the moment to public opinion who wants very harsh measures, and if we just take the GDPR, for instance, which is of course the first way of trying to take a step into safeguarding integrity and individual data, but the way that piece of legislation is playing out is that many people are worried about using data because they're worried that they might. It's a kind of, since we don't have yet any guiding rulings, we don't know exactly what the definition means. So in this blurry situation, there is a hesitance, which I think could be very, I'll get the French word néfaste, very negative for innovation efforts. We need data. We need data for training AI, for instance. And if we are worried of huge fines that might hit us, I think that we need to continue to refine the legislation so that we don't create a fear in the innovation landscape of experimenting, and many data is not sensitive. So this I think it's possible to build both a sound defense for people's sensitive personal data and still unleash all that data that we need to keep innovation engine running.
Yes, absolutely. As you were saying, also we need data to be smarter. Yeah, to have smarter policies. Yeah, that's very, very much true. Pierluigi, maybe you can also share with us your ideas on where policies should focus now.
Well, I think that one crucial aspect has to do with not de-emphasizing startups, because of course startups need support, but not just focusing on that. I think that for cultural and creative businesses, the crucial moment is when you go beyond the startup level in a market that, for the reasons that I also mentioned before, for example, the financial precariousness is fraught with uncertainty. So the point is supporting the companies that are making, in some sense, the step beyond, and help them in internationalization and professionalization, because generally cultural organizations start with very lean and informal structures that work very well when you are in the early phase, and where you are also in the heroic phase in which you are imagining, developing your idea, and basically working as a creative co-op, so to speak. But then the problem becomes that, of course, if you are facing a serious market challenges, you need to get more organized. And this is where it's crucial to have support, not only in financial terms, but also in terms of exactly competence transfer, assistance, and advisory help in terms of how to make this crucial step. There are a few countries that I think are doing an excellent job in this regard. For example, I admire a lot what the Netherlands are doing in this particular regard. But I think that in many other countries, this is badly needed. Another point is also helping culture and creative businesses to go beyond the traditional markets and the traditional goals that they have. What I mean here is that for the reasons that were mentioned at the beginning by Karen Maguire, we have today an expanding scope, for example, for culture to deal with issues like mental health, for example, or social cohesion. And again, I'm getting some, let's say, preview of what will be likely discussed also in the crossover session that will follow. But in this particular sense, I think that it would be important to integrate the dimension of behavioral intervention and behavioral change that can be related to culture and creative production. For example, in opening up new markets that have to do with issues of environmental sustainability, how can we design, for example, deploying the creative potential of culture and creative producers? How can we design, for example, not simply new campaigns, but new interventions on how to modify behaviors of people, for example, in waste recycling or in circular economy? From this point of view, there has been a huge success today from the economics and behavioral science profession of the nudging approach and other benevolent, manipulatory, paternalistic approaches to behavioral change and choice architecture that have been very successful and sometimes are also attracting considerable resources. I'm not, of course, denying that this can be helpful, but I think that in a sense, behavioral interventions that are based on culture could be much deeper in terms also of the motivational routings for humans, but also at the same time more sustainable from a social point of view. So I really see a great opportunity from this point of view for governments to start considering seriously how to deploy culture and creative businesses also in tackling societal challenges in a different way. And I am happy to report, by the way, that the work program that is likely to be released for example, for the new Horizon Europe program goes a lot in this direction. So Europe, for example, is already moving forward rather boldly in terms of encouraging this kind of experimentation. So this is where I would really like to see a more focused attention from member states, but probably it's also important that as OECD or the European Commission and the other big international organizations are really spotlighting this new opportunity as a potential game changer, not only for the cultural and creative sector, but also for the sectors that could be involved in this new kind of dialogue.
Yes, thank you very much, Pierluigi. So yes, two big points. One is on supporting the firms to go beyond the startup phase. And then another one is indeed related to this huge power culture has in terms of behavioral change. And finally, this is being accepted at quite a number of levels, including through the G20 work, on the G20 working group on culture. One of the three priorities were exactly the intersections between culture and climate change, and also how culture can promote more pro-environmentally friendly behaviors there.
Yeah, and in this regard, if I can quickly add on this, Katja, I was also surprised by how generalized is the recognition that this makes sense. It's interesting that when you have this group of the most industrialized countries in the world that are, of course, also very practical in terms of policy priorities, seeing that there is such a widespread consensus on the fact that this behavioral change dimension of culture could be something that opens up a new policy area is, I think, a very, very strong boost of enthusiasm and motivation for all those working in the culture and creative sectors. And I hope that this perception is also transferred to the policymakers, because this is where we can make the difference.
Indeed. Josh, if I may turn now to you, so what would be your policy priorities and policy needs really in this context?
Thank you. I mean, I think from my perspective, again, coming back a little bit to what I was saying before, I think the issues around rebuilding from COVID, but particularly thinking about things at the local and at the cluster level, and how we build up robust local responses in terms of responding to the COVID crisis, but then the building back better agenda, I think, is going to be particularly important. And I think one of the things that our creative radar research has shown is the importance of that local knowledge base, the local customer base, the local firm base. And I think the aims of being able to help companies to then grow and to scale and all those other things is going to be really, that local level is going to be really important. And so I think thinking about and trying to find new ways to better support local clusters, to help them recover and to really help to recreate those ecosystems that have been damaged by COVID, and recreating the sense of the local, and trying to figure out what that means in a world when everyone has got used to being in Zoom calls. How do we bring that local magic back? Because we have an evidence base that shows that that's a really important part of for local businesses, and as a source of economic growth, but also in terms of the source of innovation and lots of other things in these areas. And so I think trying to find ways to better support, and also trying to think, well, what parts of creative clusters possibly didn't work so well? How can we improve that? How can we make them more inclusive? How can we make them more robust? All of those things are things that I think are a really big and urgent issue that hopefully can provide and should provide direction to rebuilding efforts post-COVID.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, we should learn from all the evidence and research that was going on for decades on cluster policies and how to support local clusters. So maybe we can also exchange on that after we hear from La Manufacture, the Avignon story. But before going to our case study presentation, Michele, maybe you also have quite a number of suggestions for the policy priorities right now.
Well, it may sound like a banding around big words, but I find that three key European strengths, and very much building on what Pierluigi has been saying, what's really important, what's being recognized as being important at high level, is industry, creativity, and social conscience. And it sounds like grand words just being thrown out there, and it sounds very much like policy speak, but actually I really encourage people to stop and think about this over and over again and actually ask themselves, what does that mean? Because there is no other place in the world where those three areas are so closely interlinked into the social fabric as they are in Europe. And therefore they are really powerful when you think about combining them in terms of policy. They are incredibly powerful. So from my perspective, if you actually think about what does it mean to have social conscience, policies should not be rewarding winners. Policies should allow every person, no matter where their starting point, no matter what their provenance, no matter what their age, whether it's a child or an older person, to better themselves, to raise that one level, to raise according to their stage of ability, and to upskill or to inform themselves. Or so if we do that across society, we are doing something that's tremendous. And culture creative sectors are brilliant as facilitators for this, because they tend to create this common space for understanding for all of those. So what I always like to do is invite policymakers to the labs, to the experimental labs, to be active at the grassroots level, so that they can actually get their hands dirty and they can experience what inclusion, what radical inclusion, as we have to sometimes call it, because we don't want it to be tokenistic. We want it to be real and all pervasive, what it really means. So for instance, where we've had examples of, and I must add that this was not publicly funded. It was not down to ticking boxes according to some kind of funding mechanism, etc. We decided we wanted to have women in charge of all technology areas of an 800 plus people prototyping event. This is one example I can quote from our labs in Stockholm. And you have that many people and you want to put, we got people to register with options for 4 different types of gender. And we wanted to have the female category, those who declared themselves as female, to be the majority in an all-inclusive cross-gender event. Now, when you have that as a task in a technology prototyping event, we all know what the difficulty is. The difficulty is that in a classic engineering event, classically, and this is fully recorded and we have full statistics for this, we have 17% women at a stretch. When we do a creative laboratory, we instantly double this number. And this is, we find, because along the sliding scale of gender, or whatever one might want to declare themselves in terms of their identity, on one end of the scale, we have the kind of person who is enthusiastic about dabbling with technology, experimenting with gadgets, and actually seeing what wonderful things can emerge from play, which is a wonderful way to experiment and to discover new things. On the other end of the scale, and it tends to be predominantly the sort of participant that declares themselves as female, tends to be goal-oriented and mission-oriented, and they will learn whatever it takes to get there. Now, we need to actually look at the entire spectrum, and we need to actually exploit all talent in this range. And therefore, the only way to actually really, truly understand what that means is not by making assumptions, not by box ticking, not by being tokenistic, but actually by participating and witnessing and experiencing this sort of all-inclusive space in order to really understand what policies would allow for us to exploit all talent.
Yes, thank you so much. I must say it's very inspiring what you say. Maybe we can now hear from Pascal on the La Manufacture story in Avignon, and then I'll go back to you, our panel speakers, maybe for a final round of reflections on the case study, but also maybe on what we think is missing from the big picture that we just were drawing now in terms of policies that are needed right now to support this innovation flows within the cultural and creative sectors. Pascal Kaiser is president of La Manufacture in Avignon in France. Pascal, please, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you all. I hope you hear me very well. So I'm not talking from Avignon, but from Brussels, where I'm staying for family emergency issues, but I really wanted to participate. So yes, so the discussion was very interesting, and I've been working in many crossover projects between creative and cultural industries and technology industries. I'm deeply involved in the STARTS program of the European Commission from the very beginning. But today I was asked to talk of a project that is more a local project. So I'm president of the association La Manufacture in Avignon. And I'm going to explain you the various aspects of this association and how we can also operate in terms of innovation, either in the cultural, social field and also a technological field. So I think I can activate the next slide. So the vision we have for this association, it's the 20th anniversary this year of this association, and we have this 2030 vision is to create what we call a European Art Center for social transformation. And those words, social transformation, are very important. It's not social innovation, it's social transformation, which means for us much more than innovation. So the playground we have is the next slide. Maybe you are familiar with the city of Avignon, the UNESCO listed part of the city within the city walls, the medieval city. We are not in that landscape. We are about 7 or 8 minutes by bus southeast of the city, in a classical French suburbs with the urbanism from the 60s, 70s. So we have those HLM towers and buildings. And this was one of the worst urbanistic settings in France of that period. Now the French government is investing a huge program to renovate all that district. And you have here a view of the landscape, the playground we have. It's surrounded by a railway on one side, a highway on the other side. And so it's really closed on itself. In this neighborhood, children at school only meet children of their district. They don't even exchange with students of other districts. So those are some pictures of meetings we have with inhabitants and performances we are creating. So we go to the next slide. You see the type of environment. And of course, in this type of environment, you have a lot of traffic with drugs. So that's a reality. If you want to operate in such a district, it's something you are facing every day. Drug dealers at each corner of building operating. So La Manufacture is in a very specific operating mode, because in Avignon there is the time of the festival every year in July, except last year because of the COVID, and we hope this year some festival will take place. And then during the year, all year long, you have a very difficult cultural activity, because you have this huge activity in July, and then you with a status of cultural capital for performing arts. And then during the year, Avignon is a small size city in the France province, as we say in France. I mentioned the dual geography between the centrum of the city and the district where we operate, called Saint-Chamond. The economical model of La Manufacture, although it is an association, is self-sustained. In fact, we are renting our theaters. We have 2 main theaters in that district in Saint-Chamond, to performing arts company coming for the festival, and they are 100% financed by the Ministry of Culture. So we are only working with public performing arts, but they are renting the spaces, which means that La Manufacture is self-sustained 90% in terms of income. What we are doing during the year is really a participatory and inclusive project with artistic residencies with the participation of inhabitants. Our budget is about €500,000. The staff is 28 people during the festival, and about 300 if we take into account the artists and the technical staff. We have about 35,000 spectators, including 15,000 professional tickets, and 11 countries represented. So now I'm going to talk about, I think, the main focus of this panel. How can we use this tool to make prototyping projects or research and development labs in performing arts? We have won various Creative Europe projects, which for us are very important, because they enable us to network on a pan-European scale with peer organizations, organizations that are doing the same type of projects. Centriferry is a very interesting network of 9 cultural organizations working in a periphery of regions or cities. and dealing with the type of landscape I described at the beginning. It means, how do you deal with culture in spaces where people don't go to the theater or don't have even money to go to the theater? How do you build project, participatory, inclusive projects dealing with this? A second project we have is a new project we just won a few weeks ago. It's called Real In. This is a Creative Europe media project, so it includes technology. And there we are working with 3 other festivals. One in Milano, the Design Week, another one in Barcelona, it's a music and sound festival, Mira Festival, and video game and interactive art festival in Hamburg, Germany, called VR Ham, Ham like Hamburg. In this project, we are working on prototyping new types of proposals for collective and immersive proposals. So, you know, with the COVID crisis, one main issue is individual headsets. How can you deal with proposals with individual headsets in the frame of festivals? It's very complicated, even without the COVID crisis, because you have to deal with the flow of spectators, putting them individual headsets, charging the batteries and so on. So it's very, very complicated. So with those other peers, we proposed to prototype collective immersive projects using 3D scanning technologies, enabling to interact with images and sound. So this project is starting, and we will organize a symposium in each festival with all the production chain and all the stakeholders of the design, music industry and gaming industry, and of course performing arts, to check how we can share best experiences and how we can develop joint projects between the 4 sectors. So this is a very exciting project starting for us. And what I want to put emphasis on is that in each festival, in each case, we are working with small or medium-sized organizations. So it's not the Design Week in Milano, it's a foundation in Milano. In Barcelona, it's not a Mira Festival, it's a digital association, Espronceda. So we are operating for this project with small, medium-sized organizations. Another project we are starting is called Departure Classroom, and it's really tackling what Pierluigi just mentioned about the new Horizon 2020 orientations of the Commission, which I'm delighted of. Departure Classroom is using the leverage of the Avignon Festival and the exposure to develop a 7-month class for young people between 17 and 24 years old that are invisible. It means out of the radar, that completely went out of the social and educational system, and to bring them back to the community, to the society, through artistic projects during 7 months. And they, at the end, they have to present a show. The group of students have to present a show. This is a project that was started 5 years ago in the north of France, and it is now developed as a social franchise across France. There are 6 projects that are under development. And to us, this is really a very important project. And because we are in a region where a lot of young people are just getting out of the radar economically, but also in terms of cycle, let's say, and this project is really something necessary, especially with the COVID crisis that is really making this problem more complex. Then another project we are working on is international pavilions. Again, there it is using the visibility during the festival to present international pavilions with program coming from different countries or regions in the world. And this project, of course, will present those programs during the festival, but the idea is really to develop during the year empowerment strategies for the local citizens so that they learn foreign languages, English, Spanish and other languages, and participate to the communication, to the development of the projects, and also host residencies of the artists coming from those countries. Yeah, I was just listing some of the approaches we have. Use art as a skills enhancement driver. And there comes this idea of social transformation, not only social innovation, because we are talking about enhancement, we are talking about empowerment strategies. We discussed a little bit before about shared governance. It is really something very important. We are part of the city council, of the district council, and all the projects are discussed at this level. Another issue is where do you do that? If you do that in a theater or in a classical cultural venue, it is more difficult to attract non-audiences. So we work a lot on site-specific, it means in urban settings. And we work also on what I call memorial sites. It means sites that are linked to the history, to the memory of the inhabitants. So next slide. This is just a Eurostat map of Europe showing the importance of cities and urban population. And this is just linked to the Centriféry project, this project of artistic creations in peripheries of cities or of regions. Next one. So this is the landing page of Centriféry. The website is centriféry.eu, and you have all the participants of this project that is really important in terms of interaction between territories that are not in the center of European cities, but are in a periphery situation. And not only on the continent, because we have, for instance, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. Those are the participants. We have Danza Alerne, a choreographic center in Denmark. We have Festival der Region in Austria. But we have also another participant out of the map in the Azores island. It's a festival working in walks around the small villages in the Azores island. Azores island that are facing a huge loss of young people. All young people move to Lisbon or to the European continent. So next one. So this is the Real In project with this idea to work between the fields of design, music, interactive arts and performing arts. The website is real-in.eu. You have all the information. The first call is running. We make various calls for those prototypes. And it's a project that is, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. That is really targeting to cover all the member states of the EU. And to my knowledge, it's the first time that 4 main festivals in 4 different fields like design, music, performing arts, or video game are joining their forces to try to find new waves of collaboration, and specifically in the collective and immersive projects. This is basically what we are doing. And when I say invite artists, maybe to complete some comments that were done before, I think artists can bring a lot of things in the industry, in market-oriented projects. But we really need a kind of mediation so that everyone knows well what is expected from each other. I mean, when artists are working in a project that could have some market or business value, the rules have to be established very, very well from the start, which is not always easy. And then the artists have to also to accept that what they are bringing in the project can be monetized and can become a product or something with a strong economical value. So this is not always easy to handle. We've been experiencing this type of interaction in the STARTS program. And the last part of the cycle, exactly the one Pierluigi mentioned, when Pierluigi, you said, we have really to fund the successful projects so that we don't stay at the level of startups. This part is still to be worked on because it's obviously a missing part right now, because I think many projects have been integrating artists to develop joint projects with a technology company or the industry. But how can we put a lot of resources, economical resources, on the projects that are really interesting and are really success stories? It's not easy, and right now there is no organized solution for that. Next slide. Yes, then I will finish with some key points, because I was asked to do so on those interactions and how can a small cultural organization like La Manufacture bring added value, and what could be the concerns, let's say, on lessons to take. First, I think a small-scale organization are efficient for disruptive and out-of-the-box projects. When I said the Real-In project is not handled by the main festivals, but by small organizations in Barcelona, Milano, Hamburg, I think it's important. I think the COVID crisis opened doors for agile players. So I think policymakers have to track them. I have to say that in France, we have strong support in the last year of the local authorities. I mean, the city, the region, and they are in this mindset. They are really tracking operators that can come with new projects, with new philosophies that are not just classical and day-to-day business. Specifically from France, but this is specifically from France, a very strong public service for culture is a break for innovation, because many cultural organizations in France have continuous financing. So for them, it's very difficult to go out of the box, of course. And there, La Manufacture is quite a UFO in the French landscape because we are 90% self-funded, as I explained before, and we are more in an entrepreneurial mindset. I mentioned the difference between social transformation and social innovation. I think today, and it is in phased with the crisis, the COVID crisis, we have really to think of social transformation, not only social innovation. So it means an active role for cultural institutions in the interaction with society, with the interaction with people that are out of the society for a while. Of course, we have to work with this idea to break silos, and a real in project is typically that type of project where you take people from different disciplines, from design, from music, from video game to work together. I mentioned this idea of societal position of the artist. So, of course, the artist can bring a lot of things, a lot of innovation, a lot of hacking of projects, of technologies, but are we ready to give a different role to the artist than just entertainment in our today's society, and vice versa? Are some artists ready and willing to take a different role in tomorrow's society and in some way in tomorrow products? This is something key in both ways. Of course, very important, strong action of local stakeholders. The projects at La Manufacture, as I said just a few minutes before, are closely followed. And I think it's very important to have a very strong connection between local stakeholders like the city, the metropolitan area, the region, and the national state. I have to say, in France, this organization is working quite well. I worked in other countries before. The situation was not always easy. I think we are in a very good operating mode in France. That's what I'm experiencing in the last years at La Manufacture, but it is something important. Then another thing, cash is not the golden share. When we are talking with cultural institutions, it's not only talking about cash, about putting cash in a project, of course, because what they are bringing is a different value, a different added value. And finally, of course, European projects are a very strong leverage. And it's, for us at La Manufacture, it's very important to be on very local projects, but at the same time to be in high-level European networks and sharing experiences with peers at the European level. For us, something very important. So thank you for your attention, and I hope those feedbacks will be interesting for you.
Well, thank you so much, Pascal. And it was really great to hear that when you were saying that some festival activities will be happening, in fact, in Avignon this summer. So that's a very good news. Well, I was going when I was listening to your presentation, I was indeed going to ask you, so what were the key success factors for all this to happen? Because, well, the Manufacture exists for 20 years now, and it's a very successful case. But I think you explained quite a lot on that in your last slide. And I was going also to ask you about the policy supports that are needed, but you explained that, well, in France, in Avignon as well, this interaction with the local and regional and, well, state authorities is quite fluid. When you were saying that one of the things that I will remember also from your intervention is that you were saying it's important to establish some common and joint rules and agree on the objectives for a project, so that artists also agree with the other stakeholders' objectives and vice versa. And this made me think about, well, more or less similar message that we were trying to convey through our work on local authorities and museums. When a project is set up, for example, between a museum and a hospital or a prison, and this is something that Louvre was saying, it is very important to agree on each other's objectives, because they can be quite different, and not only agree on the objectives, but also agree on an evaluation framework. Maybe combining different methods and trying to align them to a shared set of objectives. So that's indeed a very practical issue and very important. So maybe I would still ask you this question. Well, you mentioned that well, this financial supports to the successful startups are quite important, but maybe you can also think of what are other 1, 2, 3 key priorities for policy action right now to support this kind of initiatives. And then maybe I will also ask our panel speakers for their thoughts and reactions. And also we can have a final round of discussion on maybe other things that are missing from the big picture that we painted through this 1.5-hour session. Pascal, it will be great to hear from you first.
Yeah, 2 or 3 main priorities for authorities and policymakers. I think for me the main challenge, and it's a little bit a continuation of this remark I had on the necessary alignment between artists and market-oriented people, is how we know that innovation comes from interaction between different disciplines. Most of the time, statistically, in the history of the last decades, and even more. So one main issue is how can we break silos between disciplines and use the cultural sector, the artist, to create those bridges. And as it was said before during the webinar, the artist and the cultural sector are very strong at that, because I mean that's one of their main skills. So the question is, for policymakers, how can we make this type of interaction more easy? And of course, it's not easy, because we have to have an alignment of mindsets that are not always the same. So this is to me a huge challenge. There are many. There are few initiatives going on. Starts is an initiative, creativity in the industry. There are many. There are many others. I think it's really a strategic question now, a strategic momentum to be able, if we want as a European society to be competitive in terms of innovation with America, with Asia, with China. That's where I think, I'm quite sure, I'm convinced we can have a very strong added value. But the challenge is, how can we create platforms enabling this? And then a second question, second issue for policymakers is, of course, there is a governance issue. There are many issues, but a very strong question is, how can we identify the successful project, the successful initiatives, and finance them? That's what, again, one of the ideas Pierluigi came with, I think the first idea he came with. And to me, this is really the huge challenge. Otherwise, we will stay, as I think Annette said, as in Europe as policymakers and legislation makers, and not product and tech makers. And at the same time, if we achieve this idea to break silos and to take the added values of the artist, I'm sure we can bring to the European citizens and to the world different products with ethics, products with sustainability values, and so on and so on. I mean, many values that artists can bring. So that would be my two main advice. Organize platforms allowing to break silos, and then detect and finance successful projects.
Thank you very much, Pascal. That's very clear. Maybe I can now turn to our panel members for your maybe main takeaways from this story, or maybe your final suggestions. Maybe we have missed something in this discussion. And maybe I can now turn first to Pierluigi, and then anyone else who would like to share their final thoughts before we close at 3:30.
Thank you, Katia. Well, I think that a huge takeaway that we have from Pascal's case is really the dimension of inclusion. The fact that clearly focusing on culture and creative industries and on economic impact, there is a tendency to work also in a kind of Silicon Valley logic. There is a logic that promotes, in some sense, disruptive innovation, but irrespectively of the social consequences of this. For example, if we look at how inhabitable, in some sense, the Silicon Valley has become for anybody who's not in the top 5%, this clearly shows that we have a problem of social sustainability. The fact that culture can have this incredibly reconnecting role, and I think that Pascal's example shows this so clearly. It's very much about starting from the premise that there is not a single human being that is not who is not interested in culture. The point is that we have to find the right key, and when we do it, really, we can transform what we tend to think as critical spaces in which we spend a lot of money and a lot of policing, a lot of, let's say, trouble containment resources into real leverages of civic progress and human development. So this is the main lesson that culture can give us. And I think that a laboratory like the one that Pascal has managed to create there, I think should really inspire policymakers, and especially those who have to do with the most serious conditions. I'm not saying that we have the magic wand. I'm not saying that culture solves everything in one shot, but what I'm saying is that there is a way. There is a way to think of culture as a realistic platform for social change and inclusion, and we need to collect more these experiences to reflect more systematically on them, and also to develop possibly some policy guidelines. And this, I think, is also part of what our OECD mission is all about.
Yes, maybe just about the social inclusion and social transformation, it is also an economical issue. For instance, this project, we have a departure class. The cost for the French society of one young person aged between 17 and 24 is 18,000 euro a year. Okay, so the class we are going to launch hosts 15 young people, and the cost of this class is 120,000 euro. That's the price to make the 7 months of class. So it means in 1 year there is a payback. Because the cost, the societal cost is 18,000 multiplied by 15, so it's even more. And so there is a payback in 1 year, and of course on 2-3 years there is even more payback. Because the placement ratio at the exit of this class is 70%. So 70% of the young find a job after. So social inclusion and transformation is also an economical issue. I mean, you can also use, ratios of the startup economy, but you don't put them a private entity, but on a societal level, there is a feedback, and there is there are mathematical ratios for the feedback and the payback of this type of project.
Yeah, indeed, that's a powerful argument. If I can turn now to Josh or Annette or Michela, if you have your final points, maybe very briefly, a couple.
I can jump in there, and I would like to say that I think that the point that Pascal was making at the end with the small scale and that is very efficient for disruption, it's of course very true, but it's also non-efficient for monetizing at this point. So I think one issue here that we really have to experiment more with is monetizing in the small scale, in the local, and that's in the completely different model. Going back to what we were saying about the Silicon Valley model.
I can add to what Annette has just been saying, actually, because it does connect also to the mechanisms that we offer these projects. And so Pascal has been mentioning Vertigo, which is a fantastic project. And the problem that some of the fantastic results that have come out of Vertigo cannot be followed up on. And one of the big problems that we face with having the underlying mechanisms that support our projects still at the level of, in Horizon at the level of FP5 or something, when our priorities were very, very different, they're so risk averse and they are counterproductive to encouraging excellence. So basically what happens in these projects is they are so preempted and predefined as to what you're able to spend on, that if any of your resulting projects excel and are fantastic success stories, all that the manager can do at this point, because they have no resources to support them. So all they can do at that point is to say, go and apply for another call in another 2 years' time. So basically completely breaks the momentum. The underlying mechanism is not designed to encourage excellence. The manager has to keep it at just that level that's been preempted. So it doesn't encourage moonshots. So intellectually, we all want to encourage moonshots. We all want to engage these people in the right way and give them the springboard so that they can actually excel. And yet what happens is that, when we ran Music Bricks, which was our follow-up to the ICT and Art, which originated STARS that we were part of. But when we ran Music Bricks, I had to go and raise, I think it was another 2/3 extra funding from private sources in order to support the what was blowing up as a whole load of new projects that were being created. And that is for every penny that I raised, I need to invest a penny. So basically it's not feasible in this current mechanism. We really need to look at how we build those mechanisms.
Yes, thank you, Michela. Josh, any final thoughts from your side?
Yes, no, I mean, I agree with the others. I think the points on the role of the local, and particularly the role of social inclusion, as seen in this, are really good examples as a case study of what these types of projects can do, and really the impact that cultural organizations can have across a broad range of areas, and provide a glimmer of hope in terms of resilience for the sector moving forward.
Well, now I would like really to thank all our speakers who joined us from different parts of the world, from their homes or offices. So thank you so much for this very rich discussion. And now we have a break of 15 minutes, and we'll meet again at 3:45 for another set of discussions on innovation crossovers between cultural and creative sectors and other sectors. So see you in 15 minutes, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.